Started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education's Zoom platform. We're very pleased and grateful to have you all here today. Especially grateful to our two wonderful panelists for being here tonight. Thank you both. Before we dive into tonight's conversation, I just want to quickly share a little bit more about the museum. The Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education explores the legacy of the Jewish experience in Oregon, teaches the enduring and universal relevance of the Holocaust, and provides opportunities for intercultural conversations. We have a robust programming schedule, including curator and docent-led tours of exhibitions, film screenings, book talks, panels like these, and more. Stay up to date by subscribing to our newsletter and checking our calendar for updates. The Burned Piano Project, Making Music Amidst the Noise of Hate, asks us to look fascism, bigotry, and hatred directly in the eye and to confront what is possible when these things go unchecked in our midst. This exhibition also explores the possibilities of bridge building with community and art as a mode of healing. I want to share quickly about a few resources that are specific to this exhibition. One is that there is a compiled list of resources for you all to take further action. One of the recommended resources is Randall's organization, so we'll talk more about that later. Those resources can be accessed on our website at the link in the chat, as well as via a QR code when you're here in the gallery. And then also created just for this exhibition, we have a series of lawn signs that focus on hate crimes and what we can do to work against them. Those are available for purchase in our gift shop and online, and there's going to be a link in the chat for that as well. Additionally, we have a lot more programs connected to this exhibition coming up, including a performance series where artist Jennifer Wright will play the piano custom artwork that she created out of the burned piano. She'll be doing those on a bi-weekly basis in the gallery. You can find all of those upcoming dates and check out all the other programs on our website as well. And I also just want to share that the museum is completely free this upcoming weekend as part of the Oregon Rises Above Hate series. It's the perfect time to come out and see the exhibition and to visit other local museums in Old Town Portland, which will also be free. All right, and now for our panelists. I'll just give them each a quick introduction and then I'm going to pass it over to them. Randall Blazak has been the chair of the Coalition Against Hate Crimes since 2002. He has worked with the National Institute of Justice and the Southern Poverty Law Center on hate crime research issues. Blazak regularly speaks at conferences, consults on criminal cases, and leads workshops on the topics of hate and bias. He's currently the vice chair of the steering committee in charge of implementing Oregon's new bias crime law. Blazak is also currently on a federal grant to develop methods to prevent violent extremism. So thank you for all of that work, Randall. And then Fay Stetz is the Civil Rights and Social Justice Director for the Oregon Department of Justice. She has also worked as an administrative law judge for the Employment Department, a hearings officer for the Parole Board, an equity associate at Oregon State University, and as a circuit court judge in Lynn County. As the Director of Civil Rights and Social Justice, she is committed to increasing the department's impact on civil rights issues affecting marginalized and vulnerable Oregonians. I can't think of two better folks to be in conversation with each other tonight about this really pressing and timely topic. So thank you again for being here. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to you both.
Thanks, Mariah. Fay is my hero, so I'm going to be her opening act tonight. I'm very honored to be on the platform with her and be able to highlight and lift up her great work she's doing at the state level. Yeah, my name is Randall Blazak. I'm the chair of the Coalition Against Hate Crimes. So let me just give you a little background on that group. That group was formed in 1997, way back in 1997, in the wake of the Oklahoma City bombing, in an effort to get community groups and law enforcement groups to be in better communication around bias-related issues. It was formed in conjunction with the American Jewish Committee and Emily Gottfried and the great work she did there. And our first chair was Rabbi Halpern at Temple Beth Israel. That was in 1997. I think I was at the second meeting as a young sociology professor at Portland State University, and I've been with the coalition ever since. And I'm really proud of the work that we do across the state, not only to raise awareness about the importance of bias crimes, but really helping to open channels of communication between groups that don't often talk to each other, including law enforcement groups and community groups. And so that's kind of what I bring to the table. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I think I've seen it all, and then we get into another phase of this issue. So when we're looking at the things that are happening at Portland State today, there's this another version of bias that's happening in our community, and I'm hoping what we'll do is sort of present our general program, and then have time to talk collectively, either addressing your questions or talking about things that emerge. I know we've got a Q&A feature on Zoom, so hopefully people can interject some good questions or things that might want to be brought up. But I would like to make this as collaborative as possible. Okay, that's just a little intro. I'm going to take about 20 minutes to talk a little bit about the reason talking about bias crimes and hate crimes are important and what's driving it in the current moment we're in. And I've got a little slideshow. So let me set up my screen so I can do this. So I really rely a lot on the my PowerPoints, So here we go. So we're often sort of making this case about why we see this criminality differently, why we see this crime differently than other crimes. And I wish I had $1 for every time somebody said, "Isn't every crime a hate crime?" I would be a wealthy man. Hate crimes work differently than other types of crime. Most crimes, by the way, are motivated by money, but there is a qualitative difference with regards to hate crimes around a couple of ways. And, a way to kind of bring this all together is think of bias crime. And we say bias crimes in Oregon, but bias crimes and hate crimes are essentially the same animal. That there is a terrorist impact of hate crimes, that there is and this sometimes seems callous, but the victims are sort of secondary. The victims have symbolic value. So let's say you want to make a racist attack. You're someone that's important to you. You want to do some type of racial motivated crime. Any person of color will do. The person that you are closest to might just be the victim, even though you don't know them, you don't know anything about them. If you want to commit an anti-gay attack, the person who's closest to you, who represents that category of people, will be a suitable target. And, I often talk about, and this is something that is harder and harder to convey to my students who are younger and younger. When we think about 9/11, we don't think of it 9/11 as 3,000 murders. We think of it as a crime of terrorism that impacts all Americans. And it wasn't specifically against the people in the World Trade Center or the people in the Pentagon. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So there's the symbolic value of victims, the category of people that they represent. But more importantly, is the ripple effects of these crimes. If I'm targeting someone because of the color of their skin or their religion or their gender identity or their sexual orientation or their disability, there's going to be a ripple effect. So there will be other people in that community that share that characteristic, that share that religion or share that racial characteristic, that are now worried that they're going to be next. So the anxiety in that community goes up. And then other communities that share other marginalized characteristics said, well, they went after them. Who's to say they're not going to go after me? And so there's another ripple that goes out. And when we look at the victimization of hate crimes, we tend to see crimes are more violent, more likely to be violent than property crimes, and are more likely to cause severe damage because people are trying to send a message. So instead of throwing a pebble into a pond, you're throwing a cinder block into a pond with multiple ripples. And then the ripples go out even farther because other people in the community start wondering who they can trust, who's on my side and who's on the side of the person that got attacked. And then the place itself starts to become associated with that crime. I mean, if you think about a place like Jasper, Texas, or Laramie, Wyoming, or Charlottesville, Virginia, many of these places become stigmatized by these crimes. So we have this much wider impact crater of hate crimes. There's a much greater harm that's done that necessitates thinking about hate crimes in a different way. And then on top of that, there's sort of what we would think of as the cumulative trauma, because what we're talking about here is trauma. The people are experiencing things that are going to affect them on an emotional level. And if they affected me now, they may affect me years down the road. And I'll give you a good example of this. We had a pretty traumatic crime that happened in Portland in 1988. Many people are familiar with the murder of Mulugeta Sarah, an Ethiopian immigrant who was murdered on November 12th, 1988 in Southeast Portland by three skinheads. The communities experienced that The Ethiopian community experienced it. Other immigrants, African American communities, gay and lesbian communities, the ripples sort of went out in 1988, and people were all sort of anxious about who's going to get hit next. As that happened, flash forward to 2017, we had an attack on a MAX train in which a white gentleman was harassing two women of color, two teenage girls, and three people ended up being stabbed, two being killed. And I had a book chapter about that murder, and part of that was going out and talking to people in the community about what was the emotional impact of the Max Train stabbing in 2017. And it was very interesting. We got sort of three responses. One was white people who said that's not supposed to happen in Portland. This is Portlandia. This is not the place where things like that happen. It's really sad that it happened. People of color said things like that happen all the time here. This was just something that was more dramatic, and it's a reminder that I'm not wanted here in white Portland, Oregon. But the most dramatic were the people that I talked to who were Ethiopian. And every single one of them to the T said it took me right back to 1988. I felt like no time had passed between 1988 and 2017. And again, I was afraid to go out of my house. I was afraid to get on mass transit. I was afraid to even exist in the city of Portland, Oregon. So we're talking about trauma existing not only across space and across groups, but over time. And this is why we kind of create this categorization of bias crimes, because there is a much bigger impact on communities. Okay, we could go at length on the trauma that comes with bias crimes. We've got a little bit of history of this in Oregon. We're not going to do a full history today. There's a great exhibit at the museum that talks about some of these histories in Oregon. And, when I moved here from Atlanta, Georgia, the first thing I noticed when I got to Portland, it was very white. It was very white. Felt like it was in a Twilight Zone episode when I got on a bus and it was all white people coming from Atlanta, Georgia. Well, it turns out there's a history behind that it goes all the way back to the Oregon Trail that gave land to white people. The founding of the state in 1859 that clearly said that Oregon is for whites only. No Negroes nor mulattoes shall reside within the state. And then we have this history of hate groups in the state, including skinhead groups, anti-government militias, the order. And we've got this sort of hodgepodge of extremist groups that have made a home in the Pacific Northwest and feel that they have a certain amount of safety in Oregon because of its history. It often shocks people to learn that the Ku Klux Klan essentially ran the state 100 years ago. Oregon had the largest Klan per capita in the whole country. It elected a governor, it elected mayors across the state, tried to shut down all the Catholic schools in the state. The governor of Oregon tried to shut down the Catholic schools in Oregon. There were some nuns that took him to the Supreme Court, and he found out he couldn't do that because of this thing called the First Amendment. But we've got this sort of history that leads us to where we are now, which is at a place where these groups feel somewhat safe. They've got a safe space, whether it's Proud Boys or 3%er militia groups or other less organized hate groups. We know that we had at least a half dozen local people at the January 6th insurrection that were arrested and charged with that. And so we've got an ideology, and sometimes they refer to it as the Northwest Imperative, that wants to carve out the Pacific Northwest as a racial homeland. They've even got a flag and a constitution written, ready to go. And the way to achieve that is through some version of what they would call ethnic cleansing, driving people out either through hate crimes or the kind of activism meant to make people of color and others feel intimidated and unsafe living here. And as someone who's been doing this work for a long time, it works. It works. I get emails and phone calls from people who are interested in moving to Oregon or moving to Portland and said, I've heard about your state. I've heard that you've got racist groups. I'm in a biracial couple or I'm in a same-sex couple. Can I bring my family to your state and feel safe? And that shows the effectiveness of these groups getting out their ideology that Oregon and the Pacific Northwest is a safe space for white supremacists. So let's bring it up. Let's bring it up to the current era. And this is something we could talk a lot about what's sort of driving all this in 2024. We've got as a sociologist, I really like to sort of rely on our kind of founding ideas, and one of the founding ideas is that slow change helps things evolve in a more stable manner, and rapid change sort of upsets the apple cart, even though it may be rapid change that we need. And when we look at what's really driving, whether it's the political mainstream movement of Make America Great Again or some of the more fringe groups, it is a deathly fear of the direction America is going in terms of demographic change. That we know America is becoming less white, it's becoming less straight, it's becoming less cisgendered. We are developing these models of equity to make our society more inclusive, but there are certain populations that feel like that means they're being pushed down. If I'm not the king of the hill, what happened to America? I want to go back to when the world looked like me and I didn't have to worry about pronouns and racial sensitivity trainings and things like that. So there's this huge pushback because things are changing so quickly. I mean, those of us who've been around a little bit remember what things were like before we had these little things in our hand and had to actually talk to each other or did things like read newspapers or go bowling. I mean, we have radically rearranged our society very quickly. And for some people, it's frightening and they want to go back. They want to go back to something in the past, and that's something that looks like 1950. And of course, 1950 is before the civil rights movement, the peak of Jim Crow. It's before the gay rights movement and Stonewall. It's before the feminist movement, the disabilities rights movement, the trans movement. They want to go back to that world. And often this world of hate is something that drives them to do that. We're also, in the days when some of us grew up, we just watched Walter Cronkite at 6 p.m. and all got our news from the same source. We're now in silos. There's sort of people on the right get their news over here, the people on the left get their news over here, and nobody has sort of this commonality. So we have this sort of these memes, these things that sort of repeat over and over and over again, and it's creating this incredible political polarity that we didn't have when I was a kid. There is this incredible world of conspiracy theories that's exploded on social media and other electronic platforms, and we certainly saw this during COVID and the notion that COVID was somehow government plots. And so those conspiracy theories sound a lot like the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that were popular 100 years ago that brought on things like the Holocaust. And so the conspiratorial thinking drives so much of the hate on the extremes. And we also have sort of these external things on the end. We have the protests, for example, around Gaza, some of which are falling into the black hole of anti-Semitism. Not all of it, but some of it is. Or we have economic drivers. It's when people lose jobs, they look for groups to blame. Or we have technological drivers. When there's things like TikTok popping up that are spreading things very quickly. And then the last thing, and again, all of this is much fodder for deeper discussion, is really a lack of credible messengers. And what I mean by that is real leadership to bring us to the middle. We're just at each other's throats and looking for ways to say my side is better than your side. And we don't have a lot of people in the middle to say, I can understand your side, but let's find some place in the middle. And I think that's part of what conversations like this are about. And so the last thing I just want to say is, how we respond to this. Part of this is getting better data about what's happening. And that's what Fay is going to talk about, how the state is really doing some good work to get a better picture of what's happening in terms of bias crimes. Building more partnerships with law enforcement. Sometimes that's difficult. Sometimes people don't want to report hate crimes to police because they feel like the police share the same bias as the person that attacked me. So creating better relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement is key. At the coalition, we work on something called the Not in Our Town response, which says basically, I might not be a member of the group that was attacked. So let's say there's an anti-Semitic attack. If I'm not Jewish, I could say, well, that's too bad for you, but I'm not Jewish, so it doesn't affect me. We show up for each other. Whether I'm in the group or I'm not in the group, we show up for whoever is the target. And that does two things. One, it helps the victims deal with the trauma because we're going to help them heal. And we're going to know that even though I'm not a part of your group, I got your back. But it also sends the people who committed the crime, committed the hate crime, hey, I might look like you, but I'm not with you. I'm with this person over here who you attacked. So that's kind of our modus operandi. And there's a lot of work to be done to understand the trauma that people are experiencing, the deep levels of trauma and where that trauma goes. And sometimes that trauma lashes out right? This idea of hurt people. So going through a trauma-informed lens is crucial in this work. And the last thing is the people who are committing these bias crimes and bias incidents, some of them are victims too. Some of them are victims of bad ideology, bad childhood. They come from families that are violent and they're taking their violence out on other people. And there's a way to reach out to those folks because often they can become the best advocates against hate and bias because they've been there. They've fallen into that rabbit hole, and now that they're out doing that work. So instead of pushing them farther away, it does us a good service to talk to them and try to bring them onto the other side. Okay, that was a whole bunch of information, but I want to make sure I left some time for Fay to talk about what's happening on the state level. Fay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Randall. Always fascinating to hear your presentations. You know so much about this, and you are my hero. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I've got a slideshow as well. I'm just going to take a moment here so that we can lift this up. Oh, I know I need to hit the special button that says share screen. Will you let me know if you can see that? Wonderful. And I thought it was fitting, if you could have heard it, to start with this video. It's called You Belong. It's part of our campaign at Oregon Department of Justice Civil Rights Unit. It showcases Oregon's diversity and brave Oregonians who are willing to share their experience of hate and bias and its impact. And these Oregonians are showing their strength and their resilience in this beautiful video, the resilience of being who they are right here in Oregon, despite all of those awful details that Dr. Blazak just talked about. Like the Burn Piano Project, it draws attention to the problem, promotes hope and healing in the aftermath of this kind of hate and violence and destruction. All right, now I've got some more slides. I'm going to try this again. I'll just skip this one. So this is a quick background about how we were able to have this country's only real-time bias response hotline that addresses hate and bias that's in a trauma-informed way. In 2019, Dr. Blazak talked about the violent crimes that happened in the election year of 2016 leading up to that year, and then we had several violent crimes, hate crimes, the years afterwards. Our Attorney General went on a listening tour and proposed, and a task force came together to look at ways to improve the law. The listening tour produced victims' voices, just like you would have heard in the video, where people talked about their experience. Look, I tried to report it to law enforcement, nothing they could do. I was left in the aftermath trying to defend for myself. Senate Bill 577 became effective in 2019. We implemented the law in the fall of 2019 by establishing a steering committee. Dr. Blazak was on that committee and contributes greatly to this work. In 2020, we had a requirement to raise up a hotline, and on that first day in January, second day in January, I answered the hotline. We didn't have enough funding. We didn't have enough people. We had one person for statewide trauma-informed bias reporting hotline. And so we hired a coordinator in March of 2020, and then COVID hit. And we had to pivot. We had to do a lot of things quickly. We had to make sure that our community partners had resources, because this bill said you need to create a hotline. You need to collect data. You need to protect data, because this is a confidential reporting hotline. You need to be trauma informed, and you need to be culturally specific. And so we had to do all of those things. We had to, in 2021, we had to ask for legislative support. We didn't have enough people. 44% of our calls to the hotline were going to voicemail because we simply did not have enough people. And we had to develop some trauma-informed tools for law enforcement who were not aware of the changes in the law around the state, so we could make sure that they were understanding their requirement, that they were required to, if they respond to bias, crime or incidents, if you respond to bias incidents in particular, they were required to make a report, a referral to the bias response hotline or to a local qualifying victim support. So on our steering committee, we had a number of talented folks to help us develop all of the processes for um, transferring, collecting this data, what data to collect. The statute says we have to collect all the possible data concerning the character, location of the impacted protected person. Now, a person who's calling about something traumatic that happened to them, they're not going to remember all the details. On the trauma-informed hotline, we're patient. We wait for the person to tell us as much as they can, in the way that they can. They can contact the hotline with us to tell their full story. And our job is to listen and believe. And so we had to develop this technique, this strategy with the Criminal Justice Commission. Mike Schmidt was the leader of the Criminal Justice Commission at the time, and we worked with heads of law enforcement, leaders from community-based organizations, as well as our state legislators and mental health experts who really helped inform our processes to make sure we were not re-triggering people who had already been through trauma. Like I said, we had some subcommittees, and Dr. Blazak was one of the many contributing members who volunteered their time to do this work. We had to do it on a shoestring budget. We got $43,000 to lift up a state, and we had to do it quickly. And so in the fall, we began meeting every 2 weeks and started to gather all of this data that we would need to put this hotline together. And in that first year, I answered the line. We had 1,101 reports that first year, and we knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg. This is the type of thing that Dr. Blazak talked about. It's humiliating, it's degrading. Someone's trying to other you, make you feel like you don't belong. And so it's difficult for people to report this to a complete stranger, a government hotline. So we were busy. We took a multi-pronged approach to try and reach, with the two of us, as many places as we could. We created toolkits that contain referral cards. We had conducted online trainings. We created resources for victims to talk about legal rights, civil rights, and other legal options. We compiled a bunch of resources. In some places toward the end of COVID, we were actually able to mobilize and go out into communities that had been hit with these hate flyers. And for many communities, it was the first time they experienced something like that. Didn't know where this garbage came from, didn't know what to do about it. And so we were able to go out onto the ground and help them and talk about this, have conversations in community with folks. We are slated to create a district attorney's victims assistance program to train our DAVAPs, what we call them. We were finding biased crime victims were getting different levels of service from other crime victims. And so we wanted to do something about that to make sure everybody was on the same page. And this year we're working on a Know Your Rights app with the National Crime Victims Law Institute around getting some pro bono attorneys for quick case evaluations and also kind of a limited representation for a biased question. Certainly, we're not expecting people to know what a biased incident is, but I put the definition here. A biased incident means a person's hostile expression of animus toward another person relating to the other person's perceived protected class, protected classes or race, color, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, or national origin. This type of biased incident lacks a probable cause, so therefore a criminal investigation or prosecution would be impossible or inappropriate. And so this new legal definition acknowledges the harm, it creates a new category, and gives verbiage to what we know has always been going on, this type of stuff. It's non-criminal for the most part. It represents 60% of the activity on our hotline regularly, 60%. And the other 40 is a mixture of things that I will talk about here in the future. And future slides here. So this is statutory requirement. I'm going to be meeting with Massachusetts, state of Massachusetts next week to talk about them raising up a hotline. And so, this was the language. We shall do these things. And there was no, and we did do these things. These are the numbers I was talking about. So you can see each year, the numbers go up. And this year we're at 1,044. And people have been getting a lot of questions. Can you explain why the numbers are going up? Is there an increase? It's like these things have always been happening. We have just never had the resource to be able to capture them on a hotline through a government service to be able to monitor these changes. Certainly, they are impacted by external world events. They are impacted by many things. But I think increasing awareness of the hotline so people have a place to report them when they do happen is crucial. This is one of these terrible slides that I have to go through, and I apologize. We have internal uh, record keeping, and I produced this graph from that. This chart is supposed to show the total, the protected classes. The 7 protected classes that I talked about, you can see the percentages in this corner here, the number of reports we've received on the hotline thus far. Again, keep in mind, there are a number of places that people can report. You can report to law enforcement, you can report to other community-based organizations. A number of communities have been trying to lift up other options for people to report hate and bias. And so here you can see 24% of these reports are race-based. That is race. This is about 279 reports. And we can see color-based in red. That's about 104 reports to the hotline. Combined, if you take race, color, and national origin, things that people see or perceive to be different, those 3 categories generally lead in the reporting on our hotline. This is a graph that is about national origin. And again, people are reacting to, feel like they can intimidate, what they see as visible. 39% of the reports we received this year are anti-immigrant. 10% are anti-Israel, 9% anti-Mexico, 7% anti-Russia. So you can see it runs the gamut. People are motivated to connect and be hateful to all kinds of people. And national origin is one of those spaces where we get a high number of reports, certainly based on what is going on around. In this next slide, we have a breakup of sexual orientation. Leading this time of year, we get a surge in anti-LGBTQ bias because of the Pride celebration. So we're trying to gear up for that. We have had surges, anti-gay, 45 reports so far this year. Unspecified, we hate queer people, 56 of those reports this year. Anti-lesbian, 8 reports, and 1 anti-heterosexual complaint we've received on the hotline so far. Gender identity. This is a disability slide. Wrong order. So disability, we have physical disability, mental disability. These are surging as well. Judgments about status all the time, and we're seeing, our people who have physical and mental disabilities being harmed as well. Gender identity, we have gender nonconforming and transgender. We have 51 reports of anti-transgender bias reported to the hotline, and another 49% gender nonconforming. So you look different in any way, behave different in any way, it's easy to become a target of somebody just deciding one day that this is what they're going to do, what they woke up decided to do this morning. On this slide, this is a slide based on religion for 2024, the reports we've received on the hotlines thus far: 79 reports anti-Jewish, 11 reports anti-Muslim, and 3 reports other Christian, and then 2 reports of anti-pagan. So there's I apologize for the tight graph, but we have some small number of categories, but a high number of categories, so that the little scale at the bottom to give you a key or clue as to what these categories are. Now, we've been pretty successful in advocating for change. One part of our the statute requires that we come back and look at the statute and look for ways to improve our processes so we're not re-traumatizing people. During COVID, we learned a lot from the narrative that people gave us. We saw that people were having trouble getting out of leases. We saw that people's personally identifying information that they put in police reports or whatever was getting disseminated. People were not being able to get time off from work to go to, to go to the hospital if they've been assaulted, to go to court if they have a case where they're testifying. So we've had to, and worked very closely with our legislative team to kind of put bias crime victims on par with other kind of specially classified victims: sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking. What are the protections those categories of people get? And can we pursue those for victims of biased crime? We have been fairly successful. So now our biased crime victims are, if it's a felony, the DA is required to consult with the victim around any type of plea deal. This was we are grateful for the court's recognition that there should be a no contact, a mandatory no contact order in criminal cases, biased crime cases, because we had a number of criminal defendants who were released from custody and then turned around and hurt somebody else, or they went back to the victim's home, school, what have you, and started harassing them again. So we've been able to get an address confidentiality program, which is disguised as your address. You can use Department of Justice address to get your mail delivered to us to protect your address after you've been doxxed. You have to have a new address. And so increasing these protections for biased crime victims, recognizing the harm, not putting that burden on the victim to then have to put these things together, piece together a life, some security, and this sort of thing. So we've been busy trying to build up and support biased crime victims, because we know the system, doesn't leave us with satisfying results. We saw people, the criminal justice system does not equal justice for the victim of crime. And so we also, as we get growing pains, we've got national and international attention for our program, but it's unique in the nation. Oregon is one of many first to have a hate crimes law back in the 80s, because we needed one, first to have a hate crimes hotline. So in July of 2022, we had abuse of our public records request process. And, the social impact and the awareness of our program has caused people in Ohio and Florida to contact us through our portal and request records of things that happen to people. And so it takes time away from people on the hotline to be able to redact these things to protect the personally identifying information. As a public agency, we're required to respond to public records requests, even if they come from people who have no connection to Oregon. Litigation costs, another thing we did not expect to have. We have lawyers who are subpoenaing our confidential information, despite the fact that we have this information available on our public data dashboard. This too leads to unexpected expenses that cut into our budget. We are on a positive note. People are volunteering for a program. We are inducting another cohort of volunteers to help us with this work as we're being pulled in many directions. We are a recipient of a Victims of Crime Act grant and are required to have volunteers. And then we've been targeted, tech targeting, because we have a hotline, we have a chat feature on our website. Someone's been trying to get at our data, but they don't realize we're really, really old school and we're still using spreadsheets. Probably safer, but we've been getting targeted on the phone, robocalls. We've been getting 800 robocalls a day, an extreme number, and it's tying up the phone. We need to put some type of CAPTCHA, some feature on the phone to stop that, get some better security. On the plus side, we are doing more training, FBI, federal partners, and we're going to be doing a training down in Medford in June, and then one in Bend also in June. In 2025, we have big plans to bring everybody together and have separate tracks for law enforcement, for prosecutors, and for victim advocates, so we can get everybody in the same room. We have a large convening here in Oregon around this issue. And I think that is my time. Sorry about the video, folks.
Thanks, yeah, no, I'm glad we have it in the chat if you want to watch the great video. There's a lot of tech in this world. We can't expect it to all work all the time. I wanted to say what I want to encourage people. If you have questions, there's a Q&A, and we've got the chat as well. To please join in, because we've got some time. One of the things I wanted to say about this law that makes it innovative, because there's several things that make this law innovative, is what Fay highlighted. It recognizes both bias crimes and bias incidents. And let me tell you why that's important. Because in the past, there have been things that have been not technically crimes. So let's say someone calls the police and says, there's somebody handing out flyers in front of my house that says that people like me don't belong. And the police have, traditionally said that's not nice, that's horrible that happened, but the First Amendment protects that, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so people get frustrated with law enforcement when we have these bias incidents because it feels like a hate crime, but there's nothing that can be done. The reality is, as I was trying to highlight earlier, there's still trauma being experienced by that. Someone marching in front of a synagogue with a swastika armband may be protected by the First Amendment, but there is real harm that is being done by that action, even though it's not technically a crime. And one of the things that makes this law that we have in Oregon now that Fay has done a great job of sort of sharing the wealth with other states, saying, look what we're doing here in Oregon, maybe try this in your state, including up in Washington, is it recognizes the trauma from not just bias crimes but bias incidents, that there is harm being done, and that's something that not only needs to be paid attention to, but also may be a factor in a criminal investigation later. Because it may turn out that that person that was walking around with a swastika armband is connected to some swastika vandalism that happened around the corner. And if we have a record of the incident, that can be used in the investigation of the crime. So it makes it a more sort of wraparound approach to dealing with the traumatic effect of bias in our communities. And in that sense, Oregon was one of the first states in the country to have a hate crime law in the late 1980s. And, the Mulugeta case was charged under Oregon's very new, it was called intimidation, the intimidation statute in those days. We're updating it. And we're figuring out what works best. The next step in this is you've got a bias crime, you've got someone convicted of a bias crime. What's the best thing to do with them? Because the general answer to that is what we call penalty enhancement. We're just going to send them away for a long period of time and teach them a lesson. And sometimes that makes a lot of sense, right? It's a deterrent and it keeps those people off the streets. But sometimes those people, once they're locked up, become more committed hate mongers. And we've had a pretty brutal case of an African-American teenager in Gresham in 2016 that was murdered by a member of a white supremacist prison gang who learned his racism in prison. So we're still, this is a work in progress. It always will be, but I think the work that's happening at Oregon DOJ is a huge step from where we've been. And I just really want to celebrate the work that Fay and her team are doing in Salem and across the state. Okay, that's my little cheerleader routine. Fay, is there anything you want to jump in when if we get some questions or we get some people that want to ask about particular things?
I will say that we have had increased. We are lower on our hotline reports this year than we were at this point last year, and I think that is because Portland Police Bureau has improved their processes. They are one of 2 jurisdictions in the whole state. The other places where I live in Albany, Oregon, the police chief in Albany, Oregon, and the detective Jacobson in Portland Police Bureau have decided that they're going to do referrals to the hotline for bias crimes and bias incidents. The statute only requires bias incidents be referred to the hotline. The belief is that that all of the wraparound services that you would get when if this case gets referred to the DA, and then the DA indicts, this triggers the DA's Victims Assistance Program. Now that can be 30 days after the incident, the crime has happened, 60 days, how long? And so these 2 jurisdictions have decided bias crime victims shouldn't have to wait for the system to acknowledge the harm. Go ahead and make that referral, connect them to our resources sooner so that they can get help. We have an emergency fund. It's a fund of last resort, limited fund. It's not a last resort, it's a limited fund. So if you have been a victim based on bias, your property was destroyed, your window was broken, something was damaged, you need a security camera to enhance your security, this emergency fund is available for individuals and for families to be able to board in a hotel while things calm down with your neighbor, or relocate We have helped people relocate from the state. What Dr. Blazak was saying about this idea that you can intimidate and harass a person to the point they feel like they don't belong here. Many people felt unsafe and left the state of Oregon rather than remain here one more day, subjected to racist taunts and vandalism and harm. And so this is one of those things that we will be able to bring back to the legislature. We're grateful to many caucuses in the legislature for hearing our plea that we need help, we need support, the victims need support, and these burdens shouldn't be shifted to them to steer alone. So I think one of the key things that we have in our statute is that it allows us to go ahead and to take some of the information that we've gotten and to help improve the law that we have and to provide the supports that people need.
Yeah. Mariah put the link to the bias crime hotline in the chat. Sometimes I just Google Oregon bias crime law and it pops up, but it's good to have handy, especially if you have people who need it. There's a couple questions. One is from Jason that asks, how can these hate crime laws promote tolerance and awareness in our society? That's a big question, Jason. I mean, I think part of this work, at least that I do on my end of it, is talking about this issue of greater harm, how these are not just crimes. I mean, sometimes somebody might say, well, they were just being silly, or they were being, dressing up like a Nazi. They thought it was being funny, or they didn't really mean anything by it, or all this sort of justification. And when we look at this notion of cumulative trauma and how serious the ripple effects of trauma are, then we build tolerance. Then people realize, because good people can do harmful things and not know it. Good people can say, well, I support the Palestinians and Israelis are the bad guy, down with everything Israel, and they're not realizing that you may be triggering a group of people in a statement like that might be coming from some place not intended to harm. But and so when we talk about the way that we traumatize each other, it goes part of the way to building the tolerance and recognizing that we don't want to hurt other people. I think I'm a good person. I don't want to hurt people, and I need to know how I might unwittingly hurt people in the things that come out of my mouth or in my actions. So it allows for us to have these conversations. And the great thing about this being a statewide hotline and a statewide resource is we can have these conversations in places we don't normally have them. We can have them in rural places, or we can have them in churches and synagogues, and we can kind of go out across the state and sort of have this wider conversation where some people may say, oh yeah, hate is a bad thing. Oh, well, God, I never thought about it that way. I never thought about how this thing that I do may be traumatizing someone, even though it's not a quote unquote bias crime. So yeah, that's a little bit, but that's always an ongoing endeavor to make people more tolerant and less harmful to each other. I don't know if you saw it, Fay, but there was a question from Jessica about how many of the victims have been supported either through funding or prosecution. And one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about is part of the mandate of this law is that we also look at the crimes longitudinally over the course of their life, not just who calls the hotline, who calls the police, but what happens to those cases down the line. Do you want to talk a little bit about the long picture that goes, instead of the data that's coming in, where it ends up?
Thank you. I will address how many people have been helped. Last year, we helped 92 victims and families. We were assisted in 2023. We spent, we were well over budget for the fund. 43 of those were bias crime victims. 49 of those were bias incident victims. In the prior year, to give you some sense, in 2022, we allocated a little more than $67,000 when the fund opened in 2022, April of that year, and then last year was $102,000 in emergency funding. When we talk about where we headed, this data, we'll be looking at we're looking at intersectionality of identities. We're looking at what are the external forces that are driving up having impacts here. We report to the legislature every year what we're doing, and the Criminal Justice Commission produces a report every year on July 1, looking at all of our data from the prior year. They make recommendations about what we should be doing going forward to improve our response to hate and bias in our state. Part of the You Belong campaign is to increase awareness of the hotline and the available resources that we have, so that people know, as you'll see in the video when you watch it, there's bravery here, there is resilience here, there is conviction, and you're looking hate in the eyes and you're saying, you know what, I'm human. I deserve to live in Oregon, without being harassed, without being targeted for being who I am. We're determined to make Oregon an open and welcoming state, despite this desire for folks to make this a white homeland. And we need the community involved. We need the community aware. This is one of the reasons we issued these community bias response toolkits, to just let everyone know. This is the reason we have all of our information publicly available. We want people to see, this is under cover of darkness and at night, as that video showed the guy slinging the hammer at the temple, that this is, we need to cast light on what our issues are so that we can address the problem with the greatest minds and the best partnerships around. We've done hundreds, thousands of outreach events last year. We had something like over 50,000 attendees, almost 700 hours of outreach, and this is around the state. And we have a team of 5 people who are advocates on the hotline. We have an investigator, a bias crime investigator that we brought on because we understood that sometimes cops don't want to talk to a lawyer who looks like me. Sometimes they certainly don't want to talk to an advocate who they may demean. So we got an investigator who's trained, a former police officer, to be able to speak their language, to help encourage them to do the work in the right way, to give them the words to show that they care, to say, you know what, this happened to you, I'm sorry, and it was wrong. Those kinds of pieces of human element. We have a bias resource prosecutor that we hired last year. He is also helping to train prosecutors' offices, helping to be a second set of eyes where our individual law enforcement did not see, or a prosecutor did not see the bias element in a particular fact pattern, to help them see how the bias indicators. And so we are committed to elevating this work, spreading this work. I don't think I'm going to stop till almost every state in the nation has a hotline to be able to capture the stuff which hasn't been captured, to help inform our laws and our policies going forward. We want everyone to stay safe. As free speech is free, but it isn't. There are costs to people's hateful and harmful words, and we want to be there to make sure that people have the support that they need in the aftermath of this stuff.
Yeah. Real quickly, there's a couple of things that popped up in the chat that I wanted to address. Is that the data that's coming in through the hotline? There is data about what happens in schools. The school data all goes through other channels. There's more than one place for that to be reported. And we're working at the coalition on a toolkit for educators to be able to not only keep track of the data, but be able to respond to bias from students and from other faculty members as well. But that is something that is often missed, the bias that happens in schools. And it is often intense and very traumatic. I mean, when young people are targeted because of their religion or their national origin, and sometimes that's fueled by external factors like political campaigns, it gets very ugly, and those can be scars that those young people carry with them. So we really want to be in front of the stuff at schools. There was another question about mental health issues. This has particularly been an issue in some of the attacks in downtown Portland, where there's a mental health nexus. A person is not a member of a hate group. They're having, some mental health issues and target a particular category of people. That's often the work at the DA's office, to really tease out what is of the criminal mind, mens rea, and what is something that is better served for a mental health service. But the important thing is the trauma is experienced either way by the victim, whether the person did it because they're a hate monger, or they did it because they're having a mental health collapse. The trauma is very real, and we want to be victim informed and trauma informed when we respond to these things.
There isn't a specific way for you to be able to check to see whether something has already been reported because it is confidential. We don't give out personally identifying information. Say if you're the only Black person in your community and you make a complaint that is race-based, it would tend to give away the identity of the person. And so we examine each record very carefully before and redact information, but there isn't a specific way for you to be able to see if you're worried about whether it was or wasn't. You can always report it and we'll take the report. We'll be able to cross-reference it internally. With regard to school, places of employment and complaints against government actors, including law enforcement, all of those during the legislative history of this bill, those were thought to be handled internally through HR. And so we were kind of kept out of the process. It's only in the light of the Criminal Justice Commission's recommendations that we started to capture these things to where they're happening. That a person may not feel comfortable reporting within their school system something that happened. And I get a lot of calls and reports from parents about the conditions that their children are having to experience and feeling unsafe in our elementary schools, in our high schools, every school across the age range. And so we started, and during COVID, we just started capturing data. This is what was reported to us. It fit in the criteria, or then we say it doesn't fit in the criteria, but it was this thing. And so we captured that because it was important to us to
And
capture
let me just say this because I want to be mindful of our time.
Sure.
That the larger goal is to be able to get good data about what's happening. I mean, there was a Bureau of Justice study in 2005 that said only 1 in 15 hate crimes were reported, 1 in 15. So that's a huge chunk that we've been missing. And this bias crime hotline is meant to get at that section under the water, the iceberg that's under the water. And the reason that's useful, even though it drives the numbers up and it looks like, oh my gosh, look how many hate crimes. We thought there were only 400 hate crimes and now we've got 4,000 hate crimes, that allows us to deploy resources. When we see certain communities are being targeted, whether it's in schools or certain groups, if there's targets, among the Ukrainian population or transgender people in Malala County, we all of a sudden we have a place to put some resources to do some work, not just to serve the victims, but to find out maybe why these things are happening and what can we do to reduce the trauma that's being caused. And so being data driven sounds very wonky and boring, but those of us that live by the data know that they can really push us in directions where real harm is happening and real good can be done to address that harm. So this work, I think, is really important, and we really appreciate if people kind of spread the word about the hotline and also the greater harm that's done by bias in our community, and that's how we heal.
Thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for the partnership. Thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So good to see you.
Thank you both so much. Thank you both for the incredible work you're doing for the state, for all of us, and for the nation. Though I learned so much just from listening to you too, and I feel very proud of the work you're doing and grateful that it's happening here. So thank you all for attending. This program has been recorded. It's going to be posted on our website and on our YouTube. I see there's even more questions coming in. Oh my gosh, this is a really important topic. I mean, we could go a little bit longer if you two wanted to. Although Randall,
there is a really important question I feel that it should be addressed about a teacher or some type of advocate reporting a bias crime or incident, even if a family member doesn't want to report it. Somebody's advocating for children. Fay, do you want to take that one because that sort of goes into your
I think that if you witness bias, you can report bias incident to the hotline. Again, we wouldn't be reaching out to that individual. We don't have the authority to investigate. We're helping the person who's on the hotline right now. It does become a data point that something happened in that community. It was reported. We would probably take the age, the race protected class that was involved, support the person who contacted the hotline if they were impacted. But I think that's an important piece. Yes, it's specifically for witnesses, our statute, witnesses and victims of a bias incident or bias crime.
Yeah, that was an important question. I didn't want that one to just be cut off at the end. So we wanted to address that one.
Right.
Hey, thanks everybody. Thank you for the work. Please go down to the museum and see the exhibit. It is very powerful, and it is all about healing. How do you heal from the trauma of hate? And music is certainly a way to do it, and art is a way to do it. It's a wonderful exhibit right next to the Hall of Human Rights. It fits together perfectly. So I encourage people to go see it. And apparently it's free this weekend.
Awesome. Thank you, Randall. Yes, and the links are in the chat if you need more information, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.